The conversation on UFOs, UAPs, and non-human intelligence has long been shaped by experience, speculation, and secrecy. What's missing is a coherent approach, one that separates data from interpretation and evidence from belief. Humanity now stands at a threshold. Encountering a non-human reality is not only a scientific mystery, it's a civilizational challenge. We must move beyond ideology and secrecy toward a science of contact, grounded in evidence, methods, and shared human values. The Human Institute is building that foundation. The Investigating Non-Human Intelligence series is the first public multidisciplinary forum dedicated to developing the scientific and ethical foundations for researching our human encounter with non-human intelligence. The series convenes leading scientists, philosophers, and field investigators to explore new approaches, methods, and emerging data and findings to ultimately generate breakthrough discoveries in non-human intelligent phenomena. These one-hour presentations bring forward serious work by serious people, charting a roadmap for a new science capable of understanding and managing the unknown responsibly before it manages us. We invite scholars, experiencers, and all who seek clarity to join us. It's time to rise above speculation and take a deliberate step toward a grounded, evidence-based response to the existence of non-human intelligence.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ted Rowe, and on behalf of the Human Institute and UAP Med, we welcome you to Investigating Non-Human Intelligence, a series of multidisciplinary presentations and panel discussions that will explore the development of a new science of non-human intelligence. Together, our two organizations have set out to create a multidisciplinary forum to build the intellectual, ethical, and scientific foundations for humanity's next great field of investigation, our engagement with non-human intelligence. This series will include lectures and panel discussions by professional and academic experts on the many facets of studying non-human intelligence and the types of research and inquiry that are necessary to detect and understand it. The Investigating Non-Human Intelligence series will chart a roadmap to investigating non-human intelligent phenomena, exploring 8 layers of this emerging field, beginning with its scientific and research foundations. Then resolving signs of intelligence, exploring consciousness and cognition, examining communication and contact, psychological and social impacts, exposure and direct encounters, public safety and responsible engagement, ethics, law, and international preparedness. The Investigating Non-Human Intelligence series will bring together scientists, philosophers, researchers, investigators, clinicians, and experiencers to share emerging findings, data, and perspectives. It will provide empirical anchors for assessing the phenomenon independently, and it will bridge the gap between expert research and lived experience, recognizing experiencers as vital sources of qualitative data. For the general public, this series offers a new intellectual framework for engaging with UAP and non-human intelligence claims and evidence. The outcome of these efforts will be nothing less than the emergence of a new field of study, the science of contact, both empirical and grounded in the ethics and human values that unite us all. Thank you for joining us as we explore the methodologies, frameworks, and investigatory practices that will become a foundation for detecting and understanding non-human intelligences. And with that, I will pass you to Reed Summers, who will introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Ted. Great to be with you all. And welcome back to Investigating Non-Human Intelligence, this public forum developed by the Human Institute in partnership with UAP Med. This series exists for a very specific reason, which is to move the conversation about a potential non-human intelligence out of speculation and into serious scientific, medical, and institutional inquiry. We opened this series of talks with a lecture by Dr. Michael Safone. In case you missed it, we'll put that on screen here, who laid out a rigorous philosophical and scientific framework for how claims of non-human intelligence can and should be considered. This lecture provided a foundational look at the science and research basis for investigating claims about NHI, and I highly recommend viewing it. Tonight's talk, next slide here, begins to build directly on that foundation. If Dr. Safone helped us clarify what counts as evidence, today Dr. Nolan will discuss what we might actually do next to validate, methodically research, and rigorously investigate the potential existence, presence, or activities of a non-human intelligence. The title of tonight's lecture is Establishing Research Roadmaps for Investigating Non-Human Intelligence, outlining a pragmatic agenda for scientific research into non-human intelligence and close encounters, including biological effects, sample analysis, and pathways to professionalize anomaly research. And we are honored to have Dr. Gary Nolan with us live to present this original work and some original data to go with it. Professor Nolan is professor of pathology at Stanford University, a world-recognized immunologist, and the inventor on dozens of patents spanning biotechnology, diagnostics, and advanced instrumentation. Over the past several years, Professor Nolan has also been at the center of serious efforts to examine the biological and material dimensions of reported UAP and potential NHI encounters, work that sits at the uncomfortable but necessary boundary between mainstream science and anomalous data collection. Rather than dismissing that boundary, Dr. Nolan has approached it with a scientist's discipline, asking what samples, what tools, what controls, and what institutional standards would actually be required to investigate these claims responsibly. After Dr. Nolan's presentation today, Ted and I will be moderating a live Q&A with you, the audience. We have up on screen here where you can access Slido, slido.com/NHI, or point your camera at the QR code. Input your questions. We ask that questions are thoughtful and pertinent to the presentation, and they will be moderated as such. Whether you're a researcher, clinician, a policymaker, an experiencer, or simply someone trying to understand how science engages with anomalous intelligent phenomena, you're in the right place. Thank you so much for being a part of this new research and investigatory journey into understanding the reality, the presence, and activity of potential anomalous intelligences in the world. So with that, thank you for being here, and please join me in welcoming Dr. Gary Nolan.
Great. Well, thank you to the Human Institute and UAP Med very much for the invitation. I do appreciate it. And of course, thank you to my fellow members of the Soul Foundation for the work that they've been doing with me on all of this. And thanks, of course, to the audience and the many individuals upon whose shoulders we stand in trying to understand this. And perhaps almost forefront in that is Jacques Vallée and his efforts over the years, especially how I've framed this set of talks around the control system that he put forward years ago that actually got him in a lot of trouble with the so-called UAP community because of how he was talking about it. So I'll start with aspects of the control system, but I'm going to move into how it is that we might start to reinterpret it in today's world, but also moving forward, and how it is that we will use the data that's being collected, turn that data into evidence and hopefully proof. And so let's just get going. So first of all, I think we've been asking the wrong question. You know, the legacy framework or the legacy program framework is, are they real? And that maybe is too human-centric, because that's looking at it from our point of view. Let's assume just for a moment that they are real. The other question might be, what is it that they want? And looking at it as what it is that they want, then immediately says, well, what is it that they're doing here? And it then pivots the entire conversation towards the human phenomenon or the human alien or the human extraterrestrial or interdimensional, or whatever it is you want to call it, as an active agent that is co-evolving with itself as it understands both, as we begin to try to understand what it might be, and as it understands what it is that it's trying to do to or with us, to the extent that it's interested in us at all. Now, I'm going to preface all of this for those who might be total skeptics in the audience or who are waiting to tweet that Dr. Nolan says that all of this stuff is real. Dr. Nolan doesn't say all of this stuff is real. Dr. Nolan says that these are some interesting hypotheses that are worth talking about. And so I'm going to take it from that point of view. But towards the end, I'm going to show some interesting new data that we've been collecting on materials that, again, move the ball forward in trying to understand what it is that we're dealing with. So first, data is raw observations. It can be noisy and it can also be anecdotal, right? So, but data is not evidence. Evidence is contextualized data. So when people say there's no evidence, that's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. There's plenty of evidence. It's just not proof. Just like in a courtroom when one says the evidence says that the person is guilty. Well, the jury still has to decide whether that evidence sufficiently constitutes proof above a certain threshold and a standard. And we'll actually talk about mathematical standards in just a little bit. So evidence would be radar tracks plus FLIR plus visual confirmation. 10,000 eyewitness accounts are data. They're a kind of evidence, but how many anecdotes make a proof? We'll talk a little bit about that as I go along. But proof is a wholly different standard. Proof is compelling, it's undeniable, it's reproducible to the extent that any of this is reproducible. Recently, Beatrice Villanarol, God, I always mess up her name, showed something that was as close to compelling proof when she was talking about the transient signals that were seen before humans had satellites. So that's the level of credibility that we want to attempt to achieve. Now, even Beatrice will not state that what she has shown is proof, but it is proof of aliens, but it's proof of something that should not have been there. And so hers is, I think, the very high standard of where we want to be able to take the discussion. So kinds of proof might be physical artifacts, which have either are made in ways that humans can't make. Now, non-terrestrial isotopic ratios can be achieved by humans, but it depends on where and when the material came from, and were humans capable of doing it at the time that the material was supposedly found. Other forms of proof might be something that's put together in a way that we don't have the capability to achieve, or it functions or has a function that we don't understand. Now, another form of proof might be an alien walks up and shakes your hand. But I don't think that we're expecting anything like that to occur anytime soon. So what we're left with is, what is it that we as mortals, we as humans, we as the standard people outside of whatever the inner circles might be that know something that we don't, what can we do? And how do we talk to our neighbors and friends about what the data actually is and means? So what would constitute proof? As I just said, a physical artifact of one kind, biological sample of some kind that, let's say, if it had DNA or if it had some sort of morphology that looks biologic, does it look sufficiently different from what we would expect from something we would expect to find on Earth? So that would require high-level peer review. The physical artifact requires verification by not only an individual lab, but multiple labs. Information transfer might be another form of proof that we are given some information that does not exist anywhere in human databases, knowledge, libraries, experience, etc., that is verifiable by humans after the fact. So you're given some physical constant that humans don't know, and then once we're told how it is that you can now derive that number which was given or that physics that was given, you actually know that that came from outside and not from somebody here. And then, of course, physics violations, some demonstration of a technology that does not move by anything that we know how to accomplish. And probably it's that last one, physics violation, that has most people intrigued and has convinced even, let's say, the policymakers that be, and Dan Farah's film Age of Disclosure demonstrates that multiple times with individuals that you would consider to be high level, people in the know, come forward and say, well, we don't necessarily know what it is, but we know that what it's doing violates our physics. Okay, so the language, though, of each era, as Jacques Vallée and others have pointed out over the years, is that it goes from things like angels, demons, fairies, the jinn, etc., the so-called supernatural, so this would be the pre-industrial age, to way out to the 2020s, the interdimensionals, back in the 1950s, the extraterrestrials, and this was the transition between here, the extraterrestrials and the interdimensionals, where Jacques Vallée got himself in a lot of trouble because everybody wanted it to be an ET, but he said, well, maybe it's something else. Or maybe it's, as Hal Puthoff puts it, ultra-terrestrial, something that's been here a long time. Does the planet really belong to us, or are we just tenants renting from somebody else? Back in the 1980s, it was actually seen as mechanical. People saw mystery airships, June Verl-style objects that had sails or cogs that looked like flywheels, but definitely something that was non-human flying around in the skies. But we don't see those today. Now we see flying saucers, orbs, lights, consciousness effects. What would it be 100 years from now? The form changes, but the function remains constant, and that is you're not alone. Or think about what it is that you're seeing. Recognize that this is data off the curve. So as Jacques Vallée put it as long ago as 1975, these are not random visitations, but he thought of it as a control system regulating how human consciousness, or how it is that we perceive outside of us. I actually will turn that around a little bit, and I like to call it an intelligence test. Do you recognize that what you're looking at is something out of context, is something which shouldn't be there, which is data off the curve? Do you ignore it, or are you the animal in the forest that walks past a mirror and growls at it continuously because you think it's another one of your species that you should be actually fighting and not actually having a conversation with? Do you recognize in the mirror it is you? And that's an interesting thing to think about when it comes to, is what the phenomenon is a mirror of us, and what is it telling us about what we are? So, there's a number of hypotheses about what it is and why it might be. And perhaps the one which is most disturbing to people is the indifference hypothesis. Everybody thinks that they're here because of us, or they're interested in us. We assume it's interested, but what if our seeing of them is merely incidental and they don't really care about us? I mean, at some level, I think this is probably the most likely of all of the hypotheses, because to the extent that they care about us at all they're trying to do is make sure that we don't walk off a cliff. They're not sitting down and saying, here's the answer to your energy problems. Here's the answer to climate change. They're letting us work it out ourselves. And perhaps that's the way parents or somebody wise should interact, because if you give your children everything, they won't learn anything. They won't learn not to touch the stove when it's hot. But the other analogy is, it's like ants building a hill, their own nest next to a superhighway. The superhighway doesn't care about the ant. You don't show up, when the ants are in, when you buy a new house, you don't establish diplomatic relations with the ants in the bottom of the garden. They're there. If they get in the way, you dig them up, but generally you try to stay out of the way. But there was a great book, a story written years ago called The Roadside Picnic. It's a Russian book originally. The aliens came, they had lunch, they left, and they left all the trash. And the whole story is about humans running around trying to pick up the trash and trying to elicit information, knowledge from the trash that was left behind. And so I think that's kind of where we are right now. We're not picking up, well, maybe we are picking up trash. Maybe some of the crashes are trash, that things that they just don't care about and they leave behind. But at the very least, what we're doing is we're picking up signatures of things that are doing something that is not apparently human. And so what is it that we're going to learn from that? For instance, we learned to watch birds fly. We desired to want to fly. We figured out how to fly. Now we're watching something which moves in ways that our physics doesn't explain. And so you have the likes of Alcubierre, and then later people like, again, Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis coming along and saying, well, here's ways that you can manipulate our understanding of physics that had with the energy and the technology, we could actually do what they do. So what they're doing is not impossible. It's just impossible for us right now with our technology. So one of the things, and this is the way that when I first started reading a lot of Jacques Vallée's work, before I even knew him, what struck me was the constant use of the word absurd in his discussions. That this is the things that people are reporting are absurd, not because they're unbelievable or that they didn't necessarily happen to these people, but the interpretation of what was happening is absurd. Why would a flying saucer land in a farmer's field? A little guy in a silver suit get out, open up something that looks like a control panel, fiddle around, and then get back in and leave, or ask for pancakes, or ask for a glass of water, or ask what day is it, and then to the farmer, and then says, no, you're wrong, and then turns around and walks away. Okay, so what is that? It's absurd. So these high strangeness events, these contradictions, these, let's say, the men in black that show up the day afterwards that say, don't talk about this, are all thought of as, by at least Jacques' interpretation, as reinforcement schedules that get you to remember and think about it. I mean, if you saw something above your house and that was odd, you're far more likely to remember what happened if some official-looking individual show up at your door the next day and say, don't talk about this, right? So that's what Jacques would interpret as a reinforcement schedule. And so it's escalation and absurdity. It's a managed target state. They're looking to, at least as Jacques would put it, or as I interpret it to be, maintain uncertainty. Well, what do I mean by that? So first of all, plausible deniability is a feature, it's not a bug, right? So the idea is you want them to think about what it is. And there's all kinds of basically equations you can write around this. And this is just a way that you would put it if you were writing this in a JSON format. But the idea is to go from skepticism, where the system might see skepticism and apathy. And if you're not looking at it, it will escalate to get you to think about it. So the goal here is force recognition. That's what I basically just said about when something shows up, you ignore it, you're apathetic about it, but then somebody shows up the next day, knocks on the door, says, don't think about it, ignore this, don't talk about it, you're going to remember it. So that's the system response. The opposite side is that once you start getting certain about a certain way of thinking that it is this or it's that, you think it's angels, or you think it's, flying sail ships. The system response is a form of absurdity, to change the narrative in such a way that you then question what it is that you're looking at. So the goal seems to be a system that regulates. It doesn't invade. It regulates in a way that attempts to maintain uncertainty, right? So the target state that seems to be what's objectable, or the objective is a level of uncertainty, because we don't know what it is. And anybody who you do talk to who claims to be involved within the legacy program or inside they continually say, well, we know it's something, we don't know what it is, because every time we try to nail it down, it seems to morph into something else. So that should tell us something. That cognitive tension actually keeps us thinking about it. And if you're thinking, generally you're learning. And that might be one of the objectives. Maybe the system wants to keep us in a perpetual state of questioning because it doesn't want you to believe. It wants you to evolve. It wants you to evolve not just genetically, but evolve in your thinking. Because maybe it's so far ahead and so different that it's still ratcheting up what it is that it might be to a point where we can better interpret it. Because again, the point is, going back to this analogy of the ants, how do you explain to ants Instagram, right? How would you do that? What would you have to do? How many levels of translation down to what an ant thinks, even if it were intelligent, how would you explain Instagram to it? How would you explain the stock market? And so if you've got these totally different levels of interpretation, how are you going to approach that? So, you know, we actually have already on our doorstep alien intelligence in the form of AI. And if you follow any of the current discussions around artificial intelligence today, and you ask, do we understand how it's thinking or how it came to these conclusions? The short answer is no, we don't. So we actually are developing our own AI. And so that AI is, if anything, a platform through which we can begin to think about, well, what happens if we can't even understand what our neighbor is thinking, if we can't even understand what another human is thinking, or even another culture on Earth. Western versus Asian cultures have different mindsets, and we can't even understand the own AI that we are making and programming. How are we going to think about alien AI? So the alignment problem of how it is that you interpret who it is that you're talking to, you actually have in your brain, when you're talking to another human, you actually have a model system that is modeling the other person, and you're constantly thinking about what they are and what their response is going to be to what you are saying, and you're reading them back and forth. So that interaction is something that we're going to have a hard time dealing with, whether an alien is, never mind whether an alien has its own AI. So that's another thing to think about, is that, you know, we talk about interdimensionals, we think about extraterrestrials, et cetera. One supposition is that what we're dealing with is not an alien at all, but is an alien AI avatar that is interacting with us because the real guys in control have got other problems on their hand, or thinking about something else. So, you know, because imagine what we're going to be 1,000 years from now. It's unlikely that we are not going to have advanced, assuming we don't walk off a cliff or blow ourselves up, that we are going to have developed AI that is so powerful that it could be really the kind of thing that we are interacting with today that was sent by another civilization long ago. So think about that. So alien AI. So again, how do we deal with advanced AI and translate those human thought modes down to human level? Now, I don't have the answer to that. This is more a sociologic and a social anthropologic problem. But like I said, the beings that we think we're encountering, or that people claim to encounter, may not be the intelligence itself, but a user interface, a GUI, if you will, designed to translate concepts that are fundamentally incomprehensible to us, but to bring it down from the level of Instagram to how you tell an ant what Instagram or the stock market is all about. So studying the biology of a gray and saying that you're now studying the intelligence, or studying what a gray might or might not tell you, should you talk to one, it's kind of like studying the pixels of a video game character and then using that to interpret how the CPU works. That's the problem, is there's not a one-to-one relationship with what it is that we think we're interacting with and what might actually be behind the scenes. And I'm not saying that that's what is behind the scenes because I have some secret knowledge. I'm saying that you have to keep that level of dissociation in mind so that you don't fall into the constant trap of bias and premature conclusions. So as it says over here, the source code might be unreadable and the avatar might be generated simply for human interaction. So I'm a geneticist, I'm an evolutionary biologist, molecular biologist, immunologist, you know, all these biologyists types. And I have a hard time thinking that whatever it is that people are seeing have 2 arms, 2 legs, and more or less look like humans. From a genetic standpoint, it just doesn't make sense. That something might have evolved on another planet, and it looks so much like us that we might misinterpret it as us. Or it we look at it and it looks anthropomorphic. So to me, when I hear these stories, all I can think is that these things are designed for us, because it could just as easily look like a rutabaga, right? Or have evolved, from with something which has 10 legs, or is completely different. So I think when you see what it is that you're looking at, don't assume that it is the reality. And that's one of the things that Jacques very often would point out to me, is that, when a scientist gets 95% of the solution, or they get 5 sigma, they think they've got the answer. No, all they've got is a probability. They don't necessarily have the answer. But from an intelligence standpoint, if you're a counter intel or an intelligence agent, if you have 99% of the problem, or 99% of what you think is the information, you might worry that you've just been given it to distract you, and that it's the 1% you don't know that is in fact the answer. So don't come to premature conclusions. I'm certainly not. So, the other way to think about this is that, humans, because of our living in time, think with linear narratives. Things have a beginning, a middle, and an end, cause, effect. We have all this processing approach, semantic, symbolic, emotional, through which we interpret stories. Humans are, I think, as intelligent as we think we are, because we tell stories from one generation to the next. But really the question is, what's the story, right? We project intentions onto the system that may only have functions, but it may have a different way of interpreting things. So a non-human intelligence, let's say maybe it can think in higher dimensional geometry, right? I mean, I can look at my dog and it can understand how to, when I point at something, to go over there sometimes. But a human would see me point and immediately know the solution. Maybe there are higher levels of thought that we are not capable of understanding yet, that we don't understand what the intent is of what is being told, and that we still need to think about it. So, structure, it might be higher dimensional, right? So it might think and be capable of perceiving 5, 6, 7 dimensions, even if it only lives in a 3-dimensional world, right? It might think in different ways, and that cause and effect don't matter where it is, because it might have the ability to think across time, or to retrospectively act, right? It might live in another level that we don't necessarily appreciate. And before you say, oh, this guy's ridiculous, how many of you are religious? How many of you believe in a soul, or in God, or in heaven and hell? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, heaven and hell are other dimensions. They're not, down at the center of the earth. So humans have not had a problem for centuries thinking about other dimensions and believing that other beings sit in these other dimensions, or have higher level understanding of where humanity is going. So scientists don't need to be religious to think that there is a non-causality relationship with a higher power and a higher being, or a higher intelligence. So, really the question is, for us, what's the story? For them, it might be, what's the current system state, and is it moving in the direction that we want it to go? So intent, as we think as humans, what do they want? That assumes a kind of goal-directed behavior. But again, this is projecting human psychology onto a system that might work an entirely different way. And so what all I'm asking for people to do is perhaps come up with other ways of representing it. The model might be emergent, that the system doesn't think with a goal in mind. The system is a complex narrative, like a storm, that doesn't necessarily want to destroy the house, but because it is forming the way that it does things, right? So you can be an intelligence without having an intent. is what I'm saying. And so and I'll be happy to share these slides with anybody who wants. There's a way that you can put this all out into a systems diagram of where the human observer is interacting symbolically with analyzers, symbology, physics constraints, etc. The NHI is let's call it a cognitive substrate. It has, let's say, an intent or directive, however it is. Again, we can't verbalize something that we don't necessarily understand, but except to call it an intent. And it interacts with us, but it's through this feedback mechanism that we're interacting with it at some level. So there's call it AI, the translation layer from the source to the semiotics, and where the human is sitting down here is all about this control system adjustment, that there's this constant feedback that we're getting. And so we might be mistaking system dynamics for a conscious strategy. The storm doesn't know what it's doing, but because of the state of the planet, the storm ends up dumping water on your property or in the mountains, etc. So, as I said before, the first intelligence that we actually agree is real might not come from out there, but is already being talked about. If you're Elon Musk, you say it's next year. If you're Sam Altman, you say it's within 5 years. That it may come from our own circuit boards. But I say that what we need to think of it as, the AI that we're generating, is a training ground for thinking about how we might interact with something else. Because already the AI that we have is almost uninterpretable as to how it comes to the conclusions that it does. So we have a training ground that we're working with. We have an interface that might actually be the way by which we eventually interact with actual alien intelligence, because it might need entirely different modes of thought that humans don't necessarily recognize. So the communication layer between us and whatever it is might be the AI that we're making, right? Because we might need it. We might need not artificial general intelligence, which is what's just around the corner. And frankly, some of the AI stuff that I work with is just about as good as what I would call AGI as anything else. But we might need artificial superintelligence to actually help us interact with whatever it is, or somehow down modulate whatever that thought process is to help us interpret what the totality of the information is. And an example of this is I've been using artificial intelligence a lot in my own laboratory to understand cancer biology and the complexity of how the immune system interacts with cancer. So we get this tons and tons of data, so much data that no human could possibly encompass it all. And yet with the AI that's currently available today, it can be every immunologist I ever needed to get on a phone, people who are specialized in myeloid cells or cancer cells or T cells, B cells, and all the hundreds of different cell types. And it can consolidate and synthesize the information in a way that is so exciting to me that I think I'm frankly talking with a superintelligence, or at least a general intelligence. So now let's say that we were to collect all the kinds of data that we know we can collect today, everything from historical records to the data that we might collect from sensor systems, et cetera, as well as sort of intent. And maybe there will be a time when the AI that we work with will be enough to tell us, hey, here's the signal that you missed. Here's the wow signal that has been sitting and looking at you, but you just weren't able to put A plus B plus C together to come to the right conclusion. So, one of the things that I often get asked is, are they exposing themselves? Why do they expose themselves? One of the things that I've just been talking about, this whole control theory thing, is it might be a slow form of, acclimatization, the boiling frog strategy, that they're basically slowly getting people up to speed so that, hey, there's enough scientists who believe that this is interesting, enough people believe it's interesting. If you were to do a poll, I think the polls say people believe that there is something. So to the extent that whatever the work is of the collective community, that part of whom are on this, have set up this series of talks. It's working. There's a whole cottage industry now of groups that are moving the conversation forward in a way that we're not relying on daddy government to come in and answer it for us. So the other one that's been out there is the zookeeper protocol. Intervention will only occur when we threaten the habitat, nuclear weapons or otherwise. And the goal there is not contact, but containment, and maybe a little bit of course correction, because maybe they're looking at us and seeing themselves several million years ago. And, we're just right now just getting to the point where we can maybe interfere with them. I often, if you've heard some of my podcasts before, call us the angry monkeys. The angry monkeys are going to be probably at least reaching out into the solar system and maybe into the local arm of this galaxy. And maybe the elders just want to keep tabs on us because we're still, a problem. I don't like the harvesting hypothesis, as to why they don't expose themselves. This idea that somehow we have something that they want, genetic novelty, soul energy, or something like that. I just, I have a hard, I don't disbelieve it. I just have a hard time with it because, if anything is so advanced, they wouldn't need to harvest us unless there's something, some sort of emotional energy or soul energy that I have no proof for. But I end on this one, the indifference. I think that they do expose themselves to us, but they don't really care. But they're not going to land and shake your hand, and our reaction is irrelevant to their intent. But there is something a little bit different, and this is, this is actually Colm Kelleher's has been over the years really refining these ideas. Whatever it is that people interact with, it seems to be reflective. It's almost like it knows you're looking. And of course, a control system would do that. It not only would know you're looking, but it would respond. But how many stories do you hear of, I noticed a light in the distance, and once I noticed it, then suddenly it got closer to me. It's almost as if somehow the interaction and the recognizing of it and recognizing that it's anomalous is sufficient for it to respond in a way to confirm it's an anomaly, right? So it almost is like a quantum system, but on a macro scale. The quantum system meaning that even physicists admit now that nothing happens until somebody notices it. Nothing happens until consciousness basically looks at it. The quantum state doesn't cohere until something notices it. And that drives physicists crazy. Maybe there's a direct neural interaction. I don't have a problem believing that something has a sufficiently sensitive sensor system that it can recognize when something at a distance sees it. I don't know how it would do it, but I don't have a problem imagining it. And then there's this notion that once being recognized, there's this so-called hitchhiker effect, where once recognized, it likes to be continued to be recognized. And so it continues showing up. But the problem is that this often ends up into the realm of what some would call woo, because it seems to manifest as what some people would term as or interpret as poltergeist activity. So I don't know what that is. But it's clear that once recognized, it seems to show up and to follow. And what it means, I don't know. But there's plenty of stories out there. So, but I think the takeaway is you don't just see the phenomenon, but once you see it and you interact with it, it's a bidirectional information flow. You've recognized something anomalous. So you think of it as a teaching system for physics, maybe, as I said before. Maybe it's evidence that mind is not local. Certainly our materialism is being challenged as to whether or not dreams and reality are the same. So, is what we are seeing real, or is it being manifested only in our brain? And one of the best stories I know for that is, again, from Jacques Vallée, a family driving down the highway in France. They had a glass-topped car. The woman who was driving and her family saw what they claimed to be a UFO over their head. The children took a picture with their cell phones. They get home, they look out, and by the way, and she's looking around at everybody on the highway, and nobody else seems to see it. Nobody else is reacting. They get home, they look at the phone, they don't see a UFO. They see just this little star-like object over their car. Seems to be, maybe about 30, 40 feet away. So what did they see? Or what did they take a picture of? And why did nobody else see it? Was it being projected into their mind? Is the reality the object, the little star-shaped object they saw? Was the reality the UFO itself? And I have a picture of what the children claim to have. I have a copy of it. And it's fascinating. But what it's telling you is that what you think you see is not necessarily what it is. And it seems to have an ability to, as Jacques would often say, take a hold of a local area of reality and manipulate it to its own good. But what I'm constantly driven towards is this notion of evolution, that it creates stress, it prompts adaptation, and to the extent that you can find anybody else to talk to about it, it brings unification and perhaps advances. And the advances would be, of course, let's say in forms of physics that we can see happening, but we don't have yet. So it's mutual, right? Their study is maybe looking at us. Our study, at least what I want to walk away from, I don't necessarily care so much about what they are. I'm more interested in what they can do. And we'll start getting into that in a minute. So, all of these things have been talked about over the years. How would we talk to them? Mathematics, there have been movies about this kind of thing, high density symbology, AIs that I've talked about as an intermediary, consciousness interfaces. Maybe the audience has other ones that they can come up with, but we have to have some way of interacting. And frankly, I think we're going to end up with needing some sort of AI as an intermediary. We just hope the AI that we develop is on our side when it's talking to them and telling us. So full disclosure, may be impossible because the truth is incomprehensible. I've already talked about the anthill, right? There might be a dimensional mismatch. We can't comprehend something which is higher dimensional or has an IQ of 500 when we're lucky if we have a few humans at greater than 170, and simply, obviously, a language barrier. So think of it as disclosure is not a file that you can open and just say, here it is, top secret, cosmic level, whatever, but it's an upgrade humans have to eventually somehow survive. We have to upgrade somehow our thinking processes or our capabilities to the point where we can interact with them at a higher level. But if they're a million years ahead of us, we've got a long way to go. So this is just another way of putting this together. And what our relationship is to reality as a human observer and the projected construct from whatever the source intelligence might be, you have to think of it that it has to translate down to it after having culturally scraped our reality to say, okay, well, how do I talk to these humans in some way that they understand through what I would call a dimensional compressor, downstepping what it is that the real intent to something that we can understand. But remember, whenever you compress something, you lose information. So it ends up looking like high strangeness and absurdity. But now you have to project it back down into our space-time so that we can observe it and see it. But there's an interaction here. So how do we break this loop? right? Because we know we've got institutional stigma, which reinforces, let's say, for academics or study funding denials. That, of course, causes low quality data and then ambiguous results because we don't have the money to collect the data we want. Maybe somebody does have the data, and they're basically making sure that the stigma stays in place to prevent the money from being. They use stigma and all of this to ridicule. And this, of course, amplifies itself. So the outstep is we need to step into it with better classification systems, better data, et cetera, and reframe the claims. And as Reed basically, and as the promo introduction video said, it's about reframing this as science, at least for me, hard engineering problems, and not the abstractness of intent is where that could basically, at the very least, lead to defense and physics interests, because every time we invent something, we tend to use it for either protection or projection of power. But that could break the loop and step out of this trap into a new one. And and I'm open about it, I think that this is the way, and by attracting the likes of Silicon Valley and investors is the way to break the loop. And I know that there's people on Twitter who hate me for saying this kind of stuff and think I'm some sort of CIA plant. But no, I've done this. I did the same thing with my cancer research years ago at Stanford, where it was not the norm to take your inventions to commercialization. I nearly didn't get tenure because of it, because people didn't like it. But now it's the norm, right? So it's because I see commercialization, at least today, with current human mentality and consciousness as the way to get incentive moving. Maybe we need to evolve into something else, but it's just not in our DNA literally yet. So what is verification? People have been doing it for years. So the UAP nuclear correlation claims, and so Beatrice's work is the most recent version of it, but it's actually been going on for years. There's a way to take data, and this was done in France, and I made this here, but it's like they take complex data, everything from visual and sensors, social media, rumors, things that are seen. They didn't have social media at this time, but at least it was media reports, legislation, and then I'm putting here Matt Sigdakis's model as well. Signal processing, all of this goes into what's called what we need to do is create what is the null hypothesis firewall. In other words, data needs to be cleaned, needs to be filtered. So you need to start before you even put any data into the system to make sure that you get rid of the garbage first, right? So you need lossless decomposition, meaning that you don't lose the data, you just throw out the data, or at least set it aside until perhaps it can be better recognized. And only then do you begin analysis. And there's a variety of mathematical approaches that you can do. Everything from what are called spatial residuals. I'm going to be talking about Bayesian posteriors, but there's also graph topology and other game theory methods to basically validate whether at some level of confidence you have the residuals that you have are reality. So there's an architecture that you can develop and that I've actually put together of how it is that you can collect data in a way that goes through this process so that at the end you have some level of reality. And this was applied to the system I'm going to talk about in a moment in France. So you can take, for instance, civilian reports, pass them through. Now it's much easier, a semantic stripper, meaning you can use AI to organize the data for you. Does it have high strangeness? Maybe you put this off in quarantine to think about later, or do you use it to say, hey, it's not so strange that I want to ignore it, but it's actually, I see a physics here that might be useful. And then you can use what I think of as the Robert Powell filter, sort of a veracity matrix. How reliable is the observer? Do you have instrument corroboration? So you split them down into the different types of multimodal sensors, and now you use that and you put it through what's called the Bayesian scoring system. And that's applying prior probabilities. Bayesian scoring is basically how the human brain operates. If I've seen it before, and I've seen it before several times, I'm expecting it more likely to occur again. And there's just a mathematics of how you can use Bayesian inference to apply probabilities, because the binary, it is this or it is that, is not how science works, no matter what it is that that newspapers say. Scientists always think in probabilities, always. And that's how we need to approach this. So the French system, this was done by several decades ago, where they were looking at nuclear sites versus population versus observed anomalies. In this case, it was UAPs. And they looked into a number of different observables. And one of the interesting things that there were a fair number of observations at the borders, as well as where there were concentrations of nuclear sites. So without going into all of their results, the older results were that there was a very high correlation with a p-value of 0.0013, that there was a correlation of the observations to the nuclear sites. They did show, others showed later, that light pollution can lower the observations. And then, of course, I won't talk about it because Matt would probably would consider me having butchered his work, that there's the disclosure model, and maybe he could be part of the series. But this very high p-value basically said that there was a 247-fold increase in UAP sightings around nuclear sites. And this narrative continues today, right? We still see these things around our nuclear sites. And this was, of course, a lot of this was before we had drones that could be mistaken. We're seeing it around our nuclear aircraft carrier. So it is interested in our higher technology, right? And so this was long published, and the original data was CNAS and Gapon from France. Basically, it verified, at least statistically, that there was the existence of these objects, whatever they are, by doing spatial analysis and doing very complex math. And I would point you to this paper if you'd like it. Overrepresentation of these things, even after you consider the light pollution, from low density, meaning where people live, to high density. So it was overrepresented near these sites. And as I said before, the light pollution brings it down a little bit, but it didn't sufficiently lower it such that you would dismiss it as just misattributed observations. So now, and this is the Medina work, and surprisingly, Sean Kirkpatrick on this, an environmental analysis of public UAP sightings and Skyview potential, basically, again, validated that these observations appear not to be random and not always to be something that should be ignored. So, and that was when he was director of Aero. So, I've already basically just said this. So the audit summary of the published papers that I think are out there that are good is that the nuclear correlation is real, and I haven't added Beatrice's paper to this yet. The light pollution does not dismiss the observations. Matt Sudeikis's work suggests that there's at least 50% chance of future disclosure based on the current trends, and a derivation of this is that there's a bifurcation that is happening right now, and that the internal models, would predict from some of the Bayesian work that I've been doing that there is some sort of legacy program with some reasonable level of confidence. So the audit passes not as proof of something, but the mathematical audit says that the preliminary data is sufficient to justify further questions. Okay, so here's how Bayesian works. Binary truth is how people like to think. Is it true or is it not? Stanford professor says this. Harvard professor says that. No, nobody said one way or the other as an absolute. They always imply underneath a probability, because that's how humans actually work. So the probability is somewhere between 0 and 100%. So certainty is asymptomatic. We update our probability based on data, and that's really how Bayesian frameworks operate. And that math has been around for literally 100 years. So, but there are different standards. There's the so-called extraordinary proof standard, what people would call the Sagan standard. Extraordinary evidence requires extraordinary proof. Well, I think that's actually a little overused. Evidence and proof only requires evidence. It doesn't need to be extraordinary. So but what people use that for as a way to dismiss any observation as if it were not extraordinary enough. And so therefore, we're not going to continue it consider it as part of the story. But there's strong evidence, and we're certainly in this realm here most of the time. But one of the things that you have to correct for in the math is something called independence decay and data integrity. So meaning that there's a social contagion problem, is that the moment something gets out into the public, it starts to infect and corrode the absoluteness of the truth, and people might just be copying. And so just because you see 1,000 Twitter posts, that might be because there's a server farm in Eastern Europe that's pumping out disinformation or a reinterpretation. So you can't count on social media anymore because there's this social contagion problem. So sensor isolation, though, is where really it's required. And here's what's interesting, because I've been doing some work on, well, how many sensors do you need to come up with evidence? So there's raw sensor data, human testimony, and physical traces. So this can all go into a reliability filter. All of this can go and help create a ratio generator, ratio of reality. Do you pass the so-called Sagan barrier? You use the information and you update your priors mathematically. And then this basically comes out, have I reached the crown jewel extraordinary evidence level that is desired? Or am I simply somewhere in the either noise or, this is really interesting, it's worth more questions. So again, there are these three levels: civilian anecdotes, trained observers, multi-sensor fusion, and the likelihood ratios that would be associated with each of those. So with a Bayesian prior, we actually start with the skeptics. The chance of this is 1 in 10 million. So now I'm the worst skeptic on Twitter. Imagine who that might be, right? So I start with, and when you start with these equations, the ones that I've run, you start with a 0.00001 probability that it's real. But when you start adding in multiple different observations, you actually very quickly, with only a few truth observations with different sensors of the same object, you very quickly actually reach the probability. And so this is my analysis of that, basically showing that it actually only takes 3 or 4 high confidence simultaneous observations to reach the p-value, the multi-sigma extraordinary evidence threshold that's required. You need thousands of civilian witnesses seeing the same thing trained observers, few, but radar plus visual, 3 high fidelity multi-sensor fusions breach the standard almost immediately, if you believe your sensors, and if you believe that your sensors haven't actually mistaken something for that it shouldn't have been. So the sensor, the independent sensor, is what's needed. So what we need, obviously, then are more independent sensors and funding for more independent sensors. And of course, Avi Loeb and the Galileo project is doing a remarkable job of that. But I also know of several other groups that are attempting the same thing. And that this is work that basically I've been doing in the background. So the proof is not an infinite problem. The barrier for proof is achievable mathematically, at least proof to what a scientist would consider. So, but let's get back to, what evidence have I ever seen? My first response when people say is there's no evidence is, well, have you even done any research? Do you even know the difference between data, evidence, conclusions, and proof? So the first one that I got involved with, and the one that actually brought me into the area originally, was when basically people representing the government came to me with what ended up being Havana syndrome. So when I saw the data, and the data was MRIs of damage and internal scarring from people, the medical reports, and then I actually went out and spoke to a lot of these people to make sure that that I could at least verify, as humans might, the truthiness of what it is that they were telling me. That is a kind of evidence which is reproducible, right? So I should be able to take an MRI of that person the next day and show the same thing, and know that they didn't have this problem the week before the incident occurred. So one of the interesting things about people who have, when we've taken out of the equation the people who actually had Havana syndrome and have been, part of what appears to be an energy weapon used by some of our adversaries, we take them out of the equation. There are actually triggers and methodologies that we can use as in biomedical terms to determine that something odd, or they were exposed to an energy that has affected their system. And again, this goes back to Colm Kelleher. He was the first, at least that I'm aware of, to think of the human as the sensor. And not that he was using the human as bait, tying them to a pole in the middle of the desert and hoping something would happen to them. But it's like, if you can get to them fast enough, you can perhaps pick up the necessary systems, or at least the feedback. So I've seen plenty of evidence of this. Dermal, epidermal interactions. I even had a biopsy from somebody who had some sort of interaction, and the biopsy, and I had it done here at Stanford by a Stanford pathologist, said, this is not a burn. This is not a dermal contact with a hot iron. This is not chemical, because if you look at the layer of the skin and you look at the cells that were the immune system cells that were collecting underneath, there was no evidence of any normal approach. There was some sort of energy transmission that only manifested a few cell layers below the top of the dermis. That was fascinating, right? It's not proof of anything except that something anomalous occurred. One of the things that does show up a lot of times with people who claim interactions with these are autoimmune triggers. So something has happened to their autoimmune system, their immune system, in such a way that they've triggered an autoimmune reaction. I mean, a common autoimmune trigger is Epstein-Barr virus, which if you have a really bad Epstein-Barr virus infection at one point, you can actually, in the long term, end up with autoimmune triggers. So this might be a marker that can be used. But there's actually another interesting marker that can be looked at almost immediately if you can get a hold of a sample within a short amount of time, and that's demethylation of the DNA. Changes that occur upon certain kinds of radiative signatures, where the DNA starts to, or the cells begin to look at the DNA and survey it for damage. And one of the first things that is happening is forms of demethylation and DNA damage cleavage events. So if you can get to them soon enough after the claimed interaction, you might be able to find evidence for some of these incident energy transmissions that have occurred to these individuals. So there are 3, at least, places where one could look for the damage. And then, of course, the other one, which isn't on this map, is the internal scarring that I saw in some individuals in their brains. So, my protocol and the things that I have told committees that I've worked with the government is that we need a procedure to immediately, upon claimed interactions, is to go and get samples from those individuals. I don't want the samples 10 years after it happened. I need the samples immediately, at least stored immediately, because then there's all kinds of diagnostics that can be applied: cytogenetics, dermatology, and neurophysiology, as mentioned here. So chromosomal aberrations that are not yet fixed by the normal processes in the body can be picked up if you can get to the individuals fast enough. So it requires teams to be ready to access. I've given necessary committees, whether they just put my suggestions in a drawer or actually implemented them, I'll never know. But there are processes that one could do and use. Because especially the chromosomal interactions are months, they can last for weeks to months depending upon the scale, but you got to get to it, because, well, what happens in the later years is actually potentially cancer. So there are known biological processes that you can get to basically prove high-level interaction with gamma. H2AX is a protein that forms foci on the DNA, and that is immediate, and it's a DNA repair signal. And then there are these so-called other DNA anomalies that are more long-lasting, harder to find, and depend upon the total amount of exposure, right? But so you want to be able to get to things as soon as possible. So that's how you collect data that is biologically relevant and usable. And this is the fingerprint of the methylation of how you would look for it. It's pretty straightforward. But I'm going to finish with the work that I've been doing on anomalous samples, and what it is that we've looked at. So we know it's a class of phenomena, not a single thing. So there's, how do you fingerprint a UAP material? So there's physical and chemical, looking at the structure, and this is the one that I'm most interested in. I'm actually building an atomic microscope as we speak. I'll show you actually a picture of it. I'll have to open up another window in a second. There's functional analysis. Does it do something interesting that, functionally? I'll show you some evidence of that, of what we've got. And then there's all kinds of corroborative research. So here's an interesting one, the so-called Ubatuba event. Now, the history says that as this was collected, that it was magnesium. But 2 sources of evidence, chains of evidence, that at least I have access to, say it's not that. Or if it was magnesium, there was also silicon, because all the material that I have access to is silicon, and that's silicon. In fact, pure silicon. So they were originally identified as highly pure magnesium. I've not seen this material. There's supposedly small amounts of it, but there's multiple grams of this highly pure silicon. How do I know it's silicon? Because I did an atomic map of it with an instrument called atomic probe tomography, where I know that it was 99.99% silicon with a smattering of magnesium in it, which the first time we had read this with this instrument, I looked at it with a high resolution instrument called secondary ion mass spec for magnesium, because everybody said it was magnesium. And I thought, this is strange because this doesn't look like magnesium. And it's only in the last few months, having looked at the data, that I recognized that there's something wrong with the silicon ratios of what it is that we've got. So we literally are counting millions of atoms here. The silicon ratios are wrong. It's supposed to be 92% For silicon-28, it's 73-ish, 72, 70. This is a different. And so a very astute student with whom I'm working over in applied physics and somebody in engineering noticed that, well, those ratios are interesting because there's less of the lowest, there's more of the next up in mass, meaning has an extra neutron, and there's another one here. So let's run some numbers, because he could think of a way that you could take pure silicon and turn it into these ratios if you exposed it to a neutron beam, because humans actually use that. We actually take pure silicon and pure silicon-30, expose it to neutron beams to embed phosphorus within it, because silicon-30 will, with another atom, another mass, you can turn it into phosphorus. So the way that it's done is, so his idea was, could the isotopic anomaly that we see be the result of neutron absorption, where 14 goes to 15, goes to 16, because you're bombarding it with neutrons and forcing neutrons into the nucleus. So he came up with a neutron absorption model. The math is all here. And it turns out that you would get exactly the ratios that we saw. I don't have the right thing here. You would get exactly the ratios that we saw if you were to expose natural Earth level silicons, which has the ratios that you would expect, what you'd find on the sand in a beach, to a neutron beam, which is 25 kilo electron volts for something like 10 to the 8th years, something that we don't have. But if you did it, the ratios that we got would be correct. So let's ask a question. You could get those ratios by purifying each of those isotopes. Humans can do that. And then you would have to mix them at a level that would give the numbers that we see. And you would have to drop it on a beach 30 years ago in Ubatuba, Brazil, with the expectation that some crazy scientist at Stanford would determine the ratios and figure it out that you would have this. So why would you do that? First of all, why would you drop pure silicon on a beach in Ubatuba, Mexico? That's the first question. The second question is, how did the ratios get to be what they are? And now that we know that there is a process that it could be, why would it be the exact ratios you would expect if you would expose it to a neutron beam of a level that humans can't accomplish today? That's just a question. So that's one interesting piece. Then there's the claimed material, the so-called bismuth magnesium piece that many people have access to. And that had been supposedly studied by the DOE and dismissed as missile casing. Well, that's just rubbish. First of all, it's pretty clear that this was exposed to heat and deformed, but we've now been doing ultrastructural analysis of it, and others have as well. And I'm not going to show all of their work, but it's clear these bubbles and things that you're seeing is clearly exposure to extreme heat. It has a layering, and Hal Puthoff has just said, hey, maybe this is a metamaterial in a terahertz waveguide. So we exposed it to terahertz waves, and it absorbs in exactly the place you would expect. And so there's basically an absorption where you would expect, given the layering that we're seeing. So the material absorbs the energy in the necessary range. We haven't yet seen if there's any, we've shown absorption. We haven't shown emission yet. It needs a different kind of instrument, but we're clearly seeing that it's doing something similar to like what Hal suggested it might be doing. That's interesting. So then we did a different technique, something called electron scatter diffraction. And what this is really doing is you're looking at the structure of the material, and to the extent that the structure of the material reflects the electrons in certain ways because the grains are crystalline, it tells you something about the orientation of the grains. So this took a long time to get going. So we took a small piece of the object that we had. We had to finish it, refine it to have to look like a mirror, and it took a lot of time. And we had got an expert at Stanford, graduate student, who was able to basically figure out how to mill the thing down and make it the right kind of plane. And so here's some of those results. So what you're seeing here and the different colors are indicative of the orientation of the grains of the magnesium within those layers. So what those black layers here is the bismuth and lead. And then each of these columnar objects here is our magnesium. So it's not a uniform field of this, that at least post whatever the event was or pre whatever the event was, these exist as granular columns of magnesium, each with a slightly different internal orientation. So the open question is, are the differences that we see in the orientation of the grains due to the damage that occurred to the material? Or was it purposeful for some reason to enable whatever the actual function of this should be? And so we have further work to do on this, but we certainly know that these are individual grains. It's not something that humans do. So there's something very unusual about this, or it's something that humans did, and because it went through a crash, and let's say that our good friend, Dr. Kirkpatrick, is right, and it's just a missile casing gone bad, and that this is the result. But I'd like Dr. Kirkpatrick to explain this to me, or somebody to explain how something a human would make would end up looking like this and have the kinds of backscatters that we observe. So more work to be done on that. So what this rules out, though, it wasn't put together by rolling and bonding, because that would have crushed the grains. So traditional human approaches are not possible. It wasn't cast. It isn't the bottom of some melting pot. And it wasn't made by electroplating, right? Because there would have been, it just, what we observe rules those out. Possibly vapor deposition, but the time at which that this supposedly was found, claimed, etc., vapor deposition manufacturing wasn't possible. Could have been bulk layering, but even now at the 100 micron scale that these interfaces are, is not possible. So we have further tests to do. High resolution transmission electron microscopy. We're going to be looking at the interface. We tried atom probe tomography already, and we weren't able to get it to basically stay solid long enough, and the tensions for the instrument basically ended up breaking it. 1 second, because I'm bringing up another video for you guys to see. So the next step here of what it is that I want to accomplish with this is to look at it at the atomic level. And I'm going to turn off my video for a moment. I'm going to open a new window for you. Media player. Here we go. Can we see that? I hope we can see this. Say yes, someone.
Yep, we can see that.
Okay, so this is an instrument that I'm building. It's a new kind of atom probe. And its purpose is not to do that. It's actually to do another kind of, basically looking, I'm interested in using it to look at DNA and the 3D structure of DNA. But this instrument in here has an ultra high vacuum, and it's at 4 degrees Kelvin. Here's the liquid helium projector that basically allows us to do what we're doing. And we're in the rundown phase for making this operable for doing atomic imaging at a level of resolution that is currently unavailable on the planet today. Because if I do eventually get a hold of something that is usable, or that is, let's say, from some other exotic place, then I would like to use an instrument like that to study it, because we need to understand our material world at the atomic level. It's inevitable that devices like this will be invented, whether it's by me or somebody else. And so I just want to get there first. And because I've always felt, and all the instruments that I've developed have always been, because a capability doesn't exist, why don't we do it? So there's a roadmap that one can project, and this is the ending thing, that we can go from where it is that we are today, hope to head towards what I would call cognitive sovereignty. We need to vaccinate ourselves against the negativity by using real data. Obviously, part of that data are whistleblowers providing safe harbor. We can have all kinds of material or other, let's say, medical tests. There are multimodal systems now coming online, and AI is our friend, at least for now. This infrastructure is global, will allow for data integration, institutionalization of this, so that everybody agrees that the data that is being collected is real. And then hopefully we get to the next level of cognitive adaptation as to what it is that we think we're seeing. And whatever it is, then it decides to represent itself in the next 10 or 20 years, we'll hopefully live to see. So my quiet colleagues over in applied physics and engineering, Stanford's continual support for me in this, and Jacques Vallée, who of course mentor to many of us, but I'm framing it in his narrative of the control system, and we're in the middle of the feedback loop still. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gary Nolan. That was a mind-bending journey. Definitely put your thinking cap on, folks, and take that in. And again, this represents the broad base of inquiry that I know UAP Med and the Human Institute want to encourage, to create a foundation for responsible, scientific, research-based investigation of the reality of non-human intelligence. So thank you, Gary. That was a lot. First time I'd heard it, so I'm going to be rewatching that several times, I know. A lot in there to unpack. There are a lot of questions and a lot of people watching. So again, if you're with us, thank you so much for being here. There's still time to get your questions in the queue. I'm going to walk through these questions in relative order of most broad and or introductory to most advanced or nuanced, and we'll just kind of go that way. So I'd like to begin with this question from Jason Albertson. Given your deep expertise in genetics and cellular analysis, what are the specific scientific criteria you use to decide whether an anomalous material or physical sample merits serious investigation?
So, the first would be, I think people focus on isotopic anomalies because it's kind of relatively easy. But isotopic anomalies are also easily dismissed because humans can now isolate isotopes and use them. The problem is humans mostly use isotopes for making uranium and blowing stuff up. Occasionally we use it for medical purposes or tracers. But we don't really very much use isotopes until recently for purposeful design. Except silicon, actually. Interestingly, people are are now making and purifying certain silicon isotopes because they make better qubits, and they keep the coherent state longer, some of the isotopes than others. So, but we don't use isotopes at scale. So really, I mean, look, I'm making that instrument that I just showed you because I'm really interested in the 3D structure of DNA. I think that's where the real code is. But, the most complex machines that we know in existence today is life. And it's a dynamic machine, and DNA is a dynamic computer, constantly computing its environment and then working with the proteins in the cells at multiple scales to accomplish life. As humans have evolved our, let's say, material capabilities of making new things, we've gone from melting ores to starting to build complex computers and circuits, et cetera, and starting to move into the atomic realm where we're designing things at the atomic level. We can't make things at the atomic level, but we can design things. So if I imagine a technology from a distant place, I don't think that they're going to be making their computer chips with resistors and capacitors and transistors, et cetera, in modular arrays. They're going to make things at the level of complexity of life, where one protein does 1,000 things, depending on its context. Now life is dynamic and things can move around, so life has more capability, I think. But I would imagine that if you're going to make a complex computer that is solid state, you could make it as a solid block of something that if I could decompose it and show that it is put together, the atoms are put together in just the right ways, or in a way that no human would ever think to do. I mean, that again isn't proof that it's alien, but it's proof that it's interesting. And once again, I'll get back to this point. I'm not interested in who and what they are. I'm interested in what they can do, because I'm interested in scraping capabilities off the surface of what might just be their trash.
All right, thank you. Great answer, and so much to be understood based upon simply what might be the junk and the detritus and the sequela of their presence, not their intentful deposition of material even.
Right.
The questions are wide and varied, and I'm having a bit of a challenge organizing them. So I'm just going to kind of go as best I can through this. There are a few questions on the potential bipedal nature of NHI. And I guess I'll start with the question that I asked, which is, what are your thoughts on the potential for a convergent evolutionary dynamic being the cause for similar body plans, biological morphologies between humans and potential bipedal, quote, human-looking, end quote, NHI?
Right. So, I mean, yes, but since we don't have, convergent evolution, of course, is a thing. I mean, we can look at marsupial, the marsupials in Australia and Tasmania, and we see convergent evolution to form. Marsupial moles look like, mammalian moles generally, because, function defines the necessary form. I can't necessarily see a reason why 2 legs are better than 4.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the most
more efficient
animals
energy-wise, more efficient in gravity, environments of similar gravity to our planetary environment.
But I mean, why? There's no particular reason why crabs couldn't become intelligent, apart from getting enough oxygen, right? So they run around perfectly fine. Octopus have 8 arms, and in fact, they have a distributed neural architecture where the arms have their own necessary intelligence. So I'm not against it. It just bothers me because I can't come up with a good reason why it should be just that.
So we have a next question, which segues perfectly. And welcome, Ted, to the stage. And Ted, please feel free to help me with this Q&A mediation moderation. This is from Levy. Regarding your comment that bipedal beings coming to Earth may not represent higher intelligence, could the gray ETs be the workforce of higher intelligence beings who are not bipedal?
That's
such as to get right that these entities were designed to interface.
That's exactly what I'm
Earth-based
saying. So
environment.
that Levy is exactly correct. It's you know, if you happen to have tentacles and waving fangs, but you're still a nice guy, you might not want to show up because you'd scare the bejesus out of the people. So maybe you make something that looks a little friendlier. But just like with the ants, if I need to talk to an ant, I might make something that looks almost like an ant. Not so scary that you're attacked, but scary, but different enough that you recognize it as different. It's back to that intelligence test. Can you recognize that what you're seeing might not be exactly what it is presenting itself as?
Right. And, species interaction etymology gives us examples of insects using mimicry, stealing each other's young, using each other's food sources and not hunting on their own. So there's all sorts of evolved traits that might explain what we see as being made for us to see.
I mean, I'm perfectly fine if bipedal is a universal norm, but I still have a problem with it.
Yeah. Well, great. Let's go to the next question, and the folks in the background can either call it up or I'll call one up. Let's go to a question. Here we go. Let's just go right to the top there with George Metcalf's question. Thank you, Professor Nolan, Reed, and Emergent and the Human Institute for an amazing presentation concerning recovered biologics of non-human origin. Where is the crossover between exobiology and xenobiology? What protocols theoretically would be enacted?
Let's see, let me see, recovered biologics. So there's a crossover. Well, exobiology and xenobiology, I mean, to me, they're kind of the same thing.
Right. Exo meaning not of Earth, xeno meaning not human.
Right. So, I mean, I think, perhaps the intent behind the question is what is the danger of that might, of things that are not harm, let's say microorganisms on or in the exo or xeno that are not harmful to them, but are harmful to us. I think the danger is there, certainly, but to the extent that anything that has been showing up had anything, and they've been around for, let's say, longer than humans have been intelligent, it hasn't wiped us out yet. So I'm not saying just go up and shake their hand right away, but I'm not concerned that it's in an incipient danger worthy of Steven Spielberg level decontamination chambers from ET Phone Home.
Right.
But I'm also not blithe about the potential dangers. So
right.
Yeah.
Okay, good. In this cosmic Columbian exchange, yes, the transfer of viral, biological, technological, mimetic substrates might play a part. So next question, we'll take Stephanie's here. And Ted, feel free to jump in and tag team with me on this. What are your thoughts on psionics who can tether with technology and the conversations they can have? How does this relate to AI data and the control system hypothesis?
Well, so psionics is a hypothesis. I know it's kind of in vogue right now to talk about, and people claim psionic interactions. I have, and my hesitation is because I know people who claim to have this ability. I have not seen the kind of scientific study done that validates it. Now, I know of people who claim that they can do it on a regular basis, and I know the people who claim that go out and do it. So it's a hypothesis yet to be at least confirmed at a level that I know I could talk to another one of my colleagues, in my arena, and say, hey, you should look at this paper that just got published on this. But I'm going to kind of switch it around, and because psionics often gets misinterpreted as magic or woo, the bad word, the 3-letter word, because it could just be technology, and that, I'll think of it this way. Our brains and everything that we are I'm interacting with you via quantum waves. You are just a series of quantum waves that happens to manifest looking like Reed, and that's how my meat brain thinks of you. And yet we're communicating via quantum signatures or quantum forms. Now, who's to say that down at the base level of reality, where quarks and everything that we think of as what form atoms, et cetera, exist, that there's not information flowing around, that just the right way of twiddling with it from a distance could either be detected or information transferred. We already know it drives the physicists crazy that you can get, quantum entanglement. It just doesn't make sense. They use it. We use lots of things that we don't understand. And so maybe we just don't understand what it is yet. And somebody else has already figured it out. So I think of it as technology. I don't think of it as magic. But it's technology that we don't understand. And I don't know how yet to reproduce it. Now, what I do find interesting is that when people claim they have these capabilities, they seem to follow families or in families. So if it follows in families, that at least suggests genetics. And since the DNA designs your brain and the architecture of your brain, then what that could say is that there's an architecture written in the blueprint of the DNA that might make some people more capable than others.
Right.
Just a hypothesis.
I'll slip a tag, kind of like a second question in there. Hypothetically, if there were ever a desire to affect human functionality or prefer one more smarter, taller, shorter, or different ethnicity over another, how would that kind of genetic intervention hypothetically take place? How should we look at that?
You mean intervention? Yeah. So there's it's kind of in the gestalt of the discussions here that somehow whatever they are interacting and changing human DNA.
Well, if at some point they wanted to alter us at that level, as a geneticist.
Level, sure, they could, let's say, but you would have to have a totality of understanding of how DNA operates that we don't currently have. It's not like you're going to splice DNA in and just, one of the things I'm known for is having developed a retroviral transfer system that allows you to move giant chunks of DNA, into cells, and all human gene therapy with retrovirus is done using a technique I developed with another guy by the name of Warren Pear in David Baltimore's lab years ago. And that was on top of something that this actually brilliant guy, Richard Mulligan, invented in the first place. I just made his system a little faster, but the original invention was his. It wouldn't be so crude because, and this is the explanation I often use. Where's the gene for nest building in birds? There is no gene. Right? There's plenty of places that you could change in the genome that would break the nest build, but the structure of what makes one kind of nest versus another is encoded in the DNA and starts way at the beginning of the first cell division when the DNA has a different structure. It's not just genes turning on and off. The DNA literally has a 3D structure. That is the compute. That is the code. And that's why I wanted to build that instrument I just showed. And each time the cell divides, you think of it as an unzipping program that's unzipping into a new environment that it expects. It expects the new environment, and it's building the structure of the brain of the bird in a way that accomplishes the nest build. So for us to design a bird that makes a different nest, we would have to understand all of those unknowable processes at a level of complexity that is a super intelligence.
Right.
So if aliens are interfering with humans, they're not doing it by some gross DNA splicing. They're doing it here and there in a way that would be, frankly, to me at least, almost impossible to trace. And would be so gradual. Because every change you make has a potential consequence of having a downside. So not only do you have to change the thing that you think is making it better, but you have to consider all the negative consequences that might occur in another way. So every advantage in one environment or niche is a disadvantage in another.
Fascinating stuff. Ted, why don't you take us to the next question?
Sure. Is it up, or?
I think we'll bring it up right now.
All right.
There we go. That one at the top we've already asked.
Okay.
I saw the one about the job. The get into AI and understand how to use AI before it uses you.
Yeah, that would be the top one, right? What academic areas should a college student pursue?
I think learning to learn. I mean, I'm in less than 2 weeks, I'm going to be 65 years old, and I'm still learning. And I'm only excited again more recently because I have AI to help me deal with the complexity that I know exists and organize. I mean, humans are visual creatures. When we were monkeys, swinging through the trees, we weren't looking at spreadsheets of where the tree branches are. We were visually processing, and our cortexes were making decisions subliminally, subconsciously. So what I found AI great at is taking complex data and representing it into forms that I can visually understand and instantly interpret. That entire presentation that I just gave now, it still needs tweaking. I basically, every one of the pictures almost was made by AI for me today, because I know how to tweak it the right way to give those pictures, all those complex diagrams, etc. Where I laid out what it was that I wanted.
I thought you worked on it for weeks, Gary. Come on.
I didn't. No,
I
only work under pressure. That's the only way I can focus.
Me too, for sure. Good stuff. We have another few AI related questions here. Oh, here's one. Okay, we'll jump around. What is your opinion about people that claim direct exposure to non-human intelligence as evidence itself?
I certainly don't dismiss it. Because as everybody knows, I publicly stated when I was a young boy, I saw little things in my room that, only 20 years later was I able to look back and say, well, this is what other people were seeing. Right now, I don't see that as proof. I mean, it could be some sort of, Jungian, the subconscious. What's the term?
Collective unconscious.
Thank you. The collective unconscious.
Yeah.
So it could be just a metaphor that anybody would see. But I don't dismiss it. And that's why actually I publicly asked for help, and actually a statistician reached out to me, is how many anecdotes make a truth? And so he says that, and his answer was, well, we can apply Bayesian priors to it. And the problem, of course, is what I raised was social contagion. in that you can influence others and their stories just by having heard it previously, which is why, for instance, Jacques Vallée says, if you think you've had an experience, don't go undergo hypnosis, because you're contaminated by stuff you've seen on TV, and all the hypnosis might do is consolidate an untrue memory. Right. So it's what I would ask for if anybody's going to interact is one of the things that I raised in the talk itself, which is, tell me something I shouldn't know. Tell me something humans shouldn't know. Tell me how to make a machine I shouldn't know how to make. That's, to me, evidence of interaction with something.
Gary, you mentioned in your talk earlier.
I'll update it just slightly, because I make fun of Neil deGrasse Tyson all the time, but he's right in this context. He says, bring me an alien ashtray. Well, aliens shouldn't be smoking in the first place. They should know better. But I think the proof of, the truth of what he's saying is, bring me something that they have that we don't have, that I can trace back to non-human. So from that viewpoint, he's 100% right.
Right. How should we regard the complete or near complete lack of such hard proof, given such a potentially pervasive and longstanding global presence? Is it leave no trace? Is it cover your tracks? Is it the evidence is actually all around us, but we just don't have the conceptual net to capture it, or the data collection net?
Well, it's like with scientists. When another scientist tells me something about what they result in their lab, I don't need to go stand over their postdocs or their PhD students' shoulders to validate it. I contextualize it with other things that I know. And as long as it conforms, I believe. Sorry, what was your question again exactly?
Oh, simply just, how should we regard the near complete lack of proof? Is it government secreting it away? Is it NHI? Is it part of the control system leaving it out for us to find?
Depending on the viewpoint, you could say it's the control system continues to lead you on into some future. You could claim conspiracy theories, or that they've gotten darn good at picking up the evidence before anybody else can. Or maybe the only proof. Maybe proof isn't global. Maybe proof is personal. That's really what the point I was getting to about scientists is, I've never seen DNA. When I was a postdoc, I cloned the gene that turns HIV on. That was my project. It's called NF-kappa B, P65, REL-A. But I've never seen it. But I know what it does. And, I was competing against dozens of other labs. Luckily, we won. And if I hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't have got my position at Stanford. And so I don't need to see it. I just need to see its effect to know that it's real. And most biologists we've never seen a protein, but we know how to tweak the system to make the protein, or at least our view of what's in the black box, operate.
Right.
But I don't need daddy's permission to know what I know. And I will continue to operate personally on the assumption that there is something. I just don't know what it is.
The effect is becoming apparent. Go ahead, Ted.
Really appreciated your talk, Gary. I look forward to hearing more from you, and thank you very much for making this opportunity available. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned earlier about medical teams collecting data from individuals with exposures. How do we get the interest of medicine onto this topic, because my experience with MDs is that they're very sensitive to image issues. The stigma seems to work against them pretty well. How do we move the interest towards people claiming exposures?
Well, I mean, one of the things you could do is, frankly, I'm just looking it up right now, anomalous health incidents. So, frankly, due to the extraordinary, I think, bravery of a number of people who came forward, and then the work of Kit Green, I mean, go look at the website health.mil. It's a military website, anomalous health incidents. Because of his efforts and the efforts of certain subcommittees that I lightly advised, I don't take any credit for this, they basically got Havana syndrome put forward as something that now has a patient registry, has a formal way that if you are a military or veteran or associated with the government, you can basically go and get veterans benefits. They have an intake system. So they've written it broadly enough, interestingly, to not just be Havana syndrome. They've written it so broadly as to be a catch basin for any kind of anomalous event that might occur.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to convince your medical colleagues that any of this stuff might be real, you can just say this might just be Havana syndrome. Get them interested. The point always is, that I find, is if you can convince somebody that the data is real, which is what convinced me when they showed up in my office and showed me the medical records and the scans, then it's not my responsibility only to give an answer. Now, if they're sufficiently interested or curious, now we can have a discussion about what the data means. So it's not about convincing people that there is a conclusion. It's about convincing them that the data is real. And so, for instance, my work on the caudate putamen that Kit Green and Jacques and Colm and I noticed, the area of the brain, the head of the caudate and putamen, being involved in cognition and potentially intuition. So when I work on what might be, let's say, some people think of as remote viewing, I'm not going to call it remote viewing in a grant. I call it intuition. And then I point to not only our own papers that we published with a group at Harvard, 3 of them, now 4. I point to the several dozen other papers that others have now already published that show the root of intuition sits at the head of the caudate and the putamen, right? So, and if you wanted to place remote viewing anywhere, that would be exactly the right place to do, because it's the central interpreter of all environmental cues. So if you wanted, evolution doesn't work by creating new organs. It overlays functions onto pre-existing systems that it can adapt towards something else.
Fascinating. I just want to thank, we're almost at the top of the second hour here. I want to thank the nearly 1,000 people who are watching live right now. Great audience and community, and great questions as well. We were just talking about this, so I thought I would put this up. And I know this, you went through some of this just now with us, but are there any other noted effects of exposure on the human brain in alleged NHI encounters?
No, I mean, the only ones that I've seen have been the overt damage to a few people, but the vast majority of those ended up being human caused Havana syndrome interactions. And so I damage would be one thing. I've not seen, well, I've seen one, but any that are reproducible enough. I think what you might want to do is, put somebody under an fMRI or other kind of, electroencephalogram, EEG, et cetera, while people claim to talk to something, and, and see what's going on. But the short answer is no. I wish I would have all the time in the world to do it. It's a great question.
Great. Yeah. Here's another follow-up, I guess, an expansion of the same question. What do you think of the possibility that they may have advanced technological ability to produce desired effects in the brain?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I was saying before.
Mhm.
I mean, look, Elon Musk is already building neural interfaces, and now, half a dozen other companies have been set up to create them. We now have the ability to put something on your head, and I can read your dreams.
Right. Right.
I mean, it's unbelievable.
Is it conceivable a device could be powered such that effect, which is already happening in a non-contact sense, like there's millimeters or centimeters of air between the device and the brain, could be projected at distance,
Why not?
Scaled up to affect a group of people, not just an individual?
Every invention that I've ever come up with, I was told was impossible before I showed it. And there's nothing that infuriates me more than being told I can't do something that I know is possible. And there's nothing that drives me more to do something. So I would say to the audience out there, and especially the ones who, for instance, said, what kind of job should I have in the future? I would just say, imagine what you want, right? Or better yet, imagine what is inevitable, right? So that instrument that I showed is inevitable. Whether I make it or somebody makes something else, someone is going to create a device that can map atoms in 3D at a level of resolution that we can't do today, except by making crystal structures or a few other, limited senses. Nobody can do amorphous 3D mapping. That instrument is a step towards it. But there's better ones I already know that I could potentially make, but I won't even dare go there until I make this one. But other people are smarter than me. And there's plenty of people who will do it. But you have to feel confident enough to say to the critics, get out of my way.
Yeah, if I may digress for a moment, I love Jordan Peterson's brief kind of side journey into commenting on papers and the writing of an abstract and how patently backwards it is. You don't just follow what everyone else did and then arrive at what you think might be possible. It's like you have a hunch, you have an idea,
right?
You have a gut intuition that something is possible, and then you go figure out how to substantiate that. So for those who are watching, if this issue, UAP NHI, triggers something for you and you feel like, there are realities at play that need to be substantiated, there's your future career path articulated.
I'd like to finish with a quote from Diana Pasulka, which I absolutely love. I love Diana dearly. But the quote was, at least attributed to her, was, if you don't want to believe in UFOs, don't start studying them.
Don't look, because you might find what's actually there staring you in the face.
Exactly.
In plain sight. Great. We have a few kind of closers, and I'd like to, if you're able, Gary, to stay on for another few minutes.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, great. Here's one from myself, and I put it up only because it taps the question of experiencers and experiential data. How should researchers be engaging with experiencers and experiential data towards substantiating the characteristic profile of reported physical NHI encounters and potential entities observed?
Well, maybe some of the many, let's say the cottage industry of groups, is maybe a reporting structure should be instituted that's quicker, than just telling your friends, because standardized reporting is what's necessary. I mean, one of the things, again, that Jacques did so brilliantly over the decades is he didn't just read what people said. He went to, distant countries like Brazil, et cetera, and did a direct interview, because you get so much more. Humans communicate more than just verbally. Our body language is so important, which is why I wanted to go talk to the pilots and others who said that they'd seen things, as part of the study I did with Kit. So, I think that we need a standardized reporting approach, and maybe you if you think you're interacting with us, say, would you mind showing up when somebody else is here to validate? I mean, if there is a two-way communication, and I don't know, I'm just guessing, I wouldn't say go sit out in the middle of the desert and ask them to show up, because you might not come back. Don't make yourself the bait. Don't do stupid things. So I don't know. I mean, it's a great question. But the only way that you validate an individual experience is that other people have seen it, or it leaves a trace.
Right.
One of the obstacles we have in reporting is how quickly we get the reports. It's usually at least 3 months for a witness to actually come and tell somebody about it, if they do it. Otherwise, it could be years. Sometimes we've got pilots that wait till they retire to tell people about it, because they don't want to risk their image at work. We have to find a way to speed this up. This is personal observation. We have to get things turning around quicker. If you see something or you think you saw something, tell somebody, say something, but I think there's a campaign necessary to actually kind of accelerate the response time on this, or we're always going to be lagging. We're not going to get that quick medical information that we're looking for, that kind of thing.
A perfect example actually was, the Council Bluff episode that I published on the materials a few years back now, that Jacques got me the thing. And so, because I had spoken about it publicly on the Joe Rogan show, I got a phone call, or an email first, and then a phone call from another witness. And he's 85 years old, and he came on with his brother on the Zoom call, and I got Jacques on to help, talk. And he said, "Look, I saw it too, but I didn't tell anybody except my brother. And I didn't think to ever mention it again until I saw you on Joe Rogan." And so, I mean, like you said, it's decades later, but it was so exciting for me to talk to a guy who corroborated it, and in a way that, and he had, he wasn't lying. He just wanted to tell his story, and he was glad to finally find somebody. And that's what I mostly find, is that most of the emails that I get, which I get way too many. I mean, don't not send me emails, but I can't read them all or answer them all, unfortunately, are the ones that just say thank you. I'm not asking you to do anything for me. Just thank you for being there and accepting that something might have happened to me. And which is why I think places like UAP Med and the Unhidden group in the UK are so important. Validation from an expert, let's say, is so important for people, and that's what's opening it up. So, I don't expect everything to change in a year or in 2 years, but I like having been part of a process that has opened it up to other people to feel comfortable to step in, because I can't do it forever anyway, right? I'm not going to
make that a fact, yeah.
And so, but just providing people roadmaps of what to do, and that, hey, it's okay. I'm still getting science awards. I got the Lifetime Achievement Award, in the name of 2 Nobel Prize winners, last year at Stanford. And in the video that they made of that, they talked about my UAP interests. So it's okay, but you have to talk about it the right way. You can't jump to the conclusions. It always comes back to this notion of it's the data, not the conclusion. Convince somebody it's the data.
I think back to 1999 when Dr. Haynes and I introduced unidentified aerial phenomena as a proper noun with a definition.
Oh, was that you? Great, thank you.
Yeah, that was our group. That was Dr. Haynes originally, and Dr. Bali was with our team at NARCAP for 15 years or so. So we had a lot of influence in our work, but it would have been unheard of to even have your UAP work mentioned, say, a decade ago. In that context of being recognized for your work. There change is happening. It is happening, and the more we can talk about this, the better. I tell you, I get a lot of stories. People contact me all the time, and a lot of them are traumatized. A lot of them are hurt. They've got issues with their families. They've got issues with their work. They've got issues with other situations because they're not comfortable in their own skins or they're terrified. So the more we can talk about this, the more work we can do, the more legitimacy we can bring to the inquiry. Whatever the right answers are, the better it is for everybody, in my opinion. And that's why we do UAP Med, and I'm sure that's part of Reed's reasoning and yours.
I mean, just take the null hypothesis that it's all fake, it's all false, as truth. Let's say it's all fake. Why do people think things are happening?
Exactly.
So just that itself should interest
the psychological, right? The psychiatrist community, right?
And et cetera. And say it's completely fake. None of it's real. It's all imagined. It's all a big, to the extent that the government talks about it at all, it's all a giant psyop. Ignore that. People still have these experiences. And so what is it? And that was John Mack's approach.
Right.
It wasn't that, I think later in his life, he basically came to the conclusion that it was real. But, he did take the right approach from a scientific viewpoint, that, look, it's happening to people, think it's happening to them. So at least to them, it's an experience. Let's figure it out and de-traumatize them at the least.
Yeah, great stuff. Well, I want to kind of end on a final question and a kind of a look back to the first lecture in which, a new science of non-human intelligence was beginning to be described, maybe framed out at the level of the philosophy of science. And Gary, in your presentation, you had a slide on a new decadal strategy, and a breaking free of this loop in which we are trapped with low data veracity, abstract or unclear results, ridicule, and lack of institutional interest, et cetera. So what are the fundamental shifts at a higher level that would take us out of that loop and into this new decadal strategy in which data becomes available, data on the presence and potential activities of non-human intelligent phenomena? How would we get that data on the ground in real research regimes and paradigms in this new decadal strategy?
Well, I'll point to Avi Loeb's efforts with Galileo Project and setting up multiple sensor systems. That's one. I won't name the people on Twitter just so as to not get everybody all focused on them. But there are people on Twitter who have observational platforms that are almost available to anybody and are showing stuff in the atmosphere that look pretty odd. Reproducibly and so frequently as to be well, if so easy, maybe I should set something up in my backyard. And so I think but it seems to be that the sensor systems are important, and Ryan Graves has said this. It was only when their radar and sensor systems were upgraded was suddenly this stuff seemed to be everywhere, which tells you something interesting, that, well, whatever, let's say, stealth that these things have is not impenetrable. Or maybe it was just waiting to be seen, and then it's going to change itself in a different way so that it can't be. I don't know. It's always just out of reach, which is, for scientists like me, catnip. I just get drawn towards what I can't understand. But maybe it's a warning to people like me that, don't throw good time after bad. So, anybody listening, I would just warn, don't go down the rabbit hole of a conclusion, because the moment you conclude something, you are walling yourself off from other possibilities. Just like this whole thing of like, are they an avatar? Don't assume that what you're seeing is what it is.
Mhm.
They're in, and that cover of the book, Passport to Magonia, I'm looking to see if I can find it. Jacques Vallée, the reissuance of a puppet hand holding an alien, which has many masks that it's holding. But
Mhm.
the puppet hand is sort of a shadowy figure behind the scenes, putting forth what you think is an alien, but the alien represents itself in different formats. Beautiful. I mean, absolutely gorgeous. I've offered the original artist a very large sum of money to get the original, but he won't give it over, sadly.
Mm.
And so I think that's what I just would warn people is don't go down the rabbit holes. Don't assume conspiracy theories. Just be careful.
Mhm.
Because
And also,
you can drive yourself, because you can drive yourself into a psychosis,
Mhm.
as people have seen now with AI. Kids treating AI as if it's a psychotherapist, and it drives them down rabbit holes. So don't get caught in that. Just be careful.
should we also be open in the years to come as data becomes available to take a more conclusive, not stance, but an assessment that is informed by that data that would inform then the action, the plan, the
Right.
policy making, the civilian or societal response to whatever this is. Because if it stays as possibility forever and never lands on anything conclusive, then we also kind of we might empower the control system to replicate its enigma and
Right.
elude our human response.
I mean, when I do experiments in the lab or I write a grant, even though I write it as hypothesis and what it is I think it is, mentally I've concluded that it's true.
Mhm.
Or I at least use that internal belief that it's true as the engine to drive my going forward and working on it. But I keep myself open to the possibility that it's wrong. But there's, you see, one of my original mentors, Leonard and Leonora Herzenberg, professors at Stanford, they were my grad student mentors. She taught me something really important, is that there's two ways to ask a question. One way is if the answer is no, you just wasted all your time. Sometimes you can just reformulate the question that no matter what the answer is, it's interesting.
Mhm.
So those are the questions that you should ask.
No.
And so I think that, to your point, Reed, is it an alien is not the question. It's what is it that's in the environment that it's causing that is anomalous, that I can record to prove that there is a force or an object or an effect.
Right. And
So
slowly over time shrink the boundary of possibility into a tighter range of probabilities that maybe at some point it could be said it is an alien or an extraterrestrial or an ultradimensional. But if there's a process to arriving at that, and even if that's probably not the final conclusion itself, that's the doorway to a new line of inquiry that has to then entertain a whole set of new possibilities.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Gary, thank you so much. Anything you'd like to share before we close up the lecture?
Oh my God, if I talk anymore, I'm done.
Gotcha.
But thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this, honestly, original work, original presentation, even though the slides or the images were knocked up with AI in the day of. I know you put a lot of careful thought into what you devised and presented. So Ted and I, UAP Med Human Institute, thank you so much for your original thought leadership and beginning to lay down this research roadmap for substantiating and validating the potential existence of a non-human intelligence. It's very important work. Ted, anything you'd like to share on UAP Med before we begin to close up?
Only that this kind of conversation is very important for the people that we try to support and serve, the folks who claim to have exposures to non-human intelligence and unidentified aerial phenomena. So the more of these conversations we can have, the more serious engagement we can get, the better off it will be for people who are having issues with this.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for UAP Med, your work on the medical side of this potential set of anomalous encounters that people are having. I think, in the latter part of Gary's lecture on the medical proof and some implications of that just stood out. And I think it would for the 1,100 people watching as vital to understand the nature of what is going on in the mind, in the brain, in the body of those who have had these encounters.
Absolutely. Experiencers are on the front edge of all of this, and we can't ignore them. There's too much information there. We just have to learn how to contextualize it and divine its actual meaning. And then we got to get to it quicker, as I pointed out earlier.
Yep. Yeah. Good. Well, thank you, Ted. I'll give some closing remarks here, and I invite everyone watching to pay close attention to the next speaker in the series. It'll be Beatrice Villarroel talking about technosignatures, signatures of multiple modes of a potential intelligent presence in the Earth's upper atmosphere near Earth space environment. So January 9th, Beatrice will be giving the third lecture in the series, and then it's our hope to host a panel with Beatrice, Michael Safone, and Gary Nolan, basically looking at standards of evidence and the roadmap going forward for how science and research can begin to make inroads into this enigma and generate credible, solid, reliable insight into the nature of this anomalous intelligence, its capabilities, what it is able to do, as Gary so eloquently described and called out, to help inform whatever our human response plan may ultimately need to be to it. So very important work. I think it's clear there's an exigency driving this new initiative to research and investigate the foundations and fundamentals of the phenomenon at the level of its intelligence and its interactivity. So thank you so much for being a part of it. Please like, subscribe, and share. Get this conversation to others. If you or you know someone who would be a potential speaker in this series, please reach out. You can email us at info@humaninstitute.org. You can submit an abstract right on the website. And we have a great lineup of speakers heading into 2026 as we go down the 8-part roadmap that Ted Rowe presented at the beginning, looking at signs of intelligence and all of the various dimensions of this potential encounter and engagement that is taking place. Again, please thank you for subscribing to the channel here. Register for the series going forward to get notifications of all the lectures, priority Q&A with the speakers, and we'll build the community as we go forward. I also want to just call out before we close that Human Institute is hosting a UAP summit in February 7th and 8th. Dr. Gary Nolan will be one of the speakers, and it is on the topic of detecting and tracking UAP. Not sure if we have something to put on screen for that, but for those who are interested in what Gary was speaking of, which is the technologies, the sensors that could be used to observe anomalies in the atmosphere and generate real data about UAP, that is definitely the place to be. The UAP Detection and Tracking Summit will be an amazing forum bringing forward many of the technology, research, and academic groups that are cracking the code, you could say, investigating the skies, and generating key data to drive disclosure itself. And so the UAP Summit has limited seating, so please go over and grab your seat, and we look forward to seeing you there. And with that, I'll say good night. Thank you so much for joining Ted Rowe, Dr. Gary Nolan, myself, and we will take this investigation forward. Thank you so much.